Hello Internet, I'm Jockey Fox, and today I want to talk about the relationship between police in America and mass shootings. Because it's absolutely not what you might think. And when you realize the way things actually work, it might actually change how you think about other issues involving the police. So let's dive in. First, a quick disclaimer, I'm actually going to be commenting on at least two events that are about a week old and a day old respectively. And usually I don't like to make commentary on anything that fast, especially breaking news stories, because for events like that, it can take quite a long time for enough people to question the initial police reporting to actually get quite a bit of the truth of a story out. After the Uvalde, Texas shootings, things didn't go as they usually go, though. People started questioning the official narrative almost right away because it left a long gap in which the police were reportedly looking for a key and trying to find a way into a room. It is in this time frame that a large number of students are killed, and this naturally led the public to ask more and more questions about why the police did not act sooner. In fact, there have been parents who showed up to the school after hearing news and pleading with the police to go in there and save their children. And this is an intersection of two familiar trends in the news recently, and there are plenty of examples of both of these things happening even within the last couple of days. In fact, I'm only going to be mentioning things that happened within the last couple of days, but bear in mind that this shit literally happens all the time. So there's not necessarily a clear answer or confession, even after we've learned more and more over the last few days about what happened at that Texas school, because there's a certain point the police just stopped talking, and the excuses that we've seen so far is that they believe the shooter had been safely blocked off, which seemed to ignore the fact that police were also getting calls from inside the classroom, calls that seemed to indicate that the shooter was still killing students even while they were supposedly looking for a key, believing that they had him safely blocked off. I find it hard to believe, personally, that they didn't hear these children being gunned down with an assault rifle, or they didn't realize that's where the injured children was. Because with some of these injuries, it might have been possible to save them. And the moments after being shot, especially if you're a small child losing a lot of blood in what probably isn't the most sanitary of places, the floor of a school classroom, you probably, every minute is very crucial in whether or not you live or die. So even if they didn't think the shooter was actively shooting people, getting to the people who had already been shot was still an important objective that they seem to ignore for an extended period of time. And you're probably wondering if they will be legally held accountable for the time that they wasted. Well, they won't. There may very well be some disciplinary action, but there is no legal reason, fundamentally speaking, for the police to protect your life. They have absolutely no obligation to, and furthermore, why would they risk their lives when they're not required to?
And while those ideas are clearly ridiculous, hardening our schools often comes up as an alternative to gun control. And at the NRA convention that inexplicably still took place in Texas just 3 days after the shooting there, Wayne LaPierre pitched the exact same solution that he did after Sandy Hook and after Parkland.
We also need to fully fund our nation's police departments and school security resource officer programs.
Exactly. Put police, or school resource officers, or SROs as they're sometimes called, into schools. And I guess it's not that surprising that the solution from the CEO of the NRA is more people with guns. It'd be like hearing the garbage dump is overflowing, so we need more piles of garbage from the head of the National Raccoon Association. I mean, what else do you really expect him to say? But the idea of adding police to schools does seem to come up in the wake of every big school shooting, and crucially, it's then the thing that we always do. In fact, in the 6 years after the Columbine massacre in 1999, the federal government awarded over $750 million resulting in the hiring of over 6,500 SROs. And since then, it has exploded to the point that the most recent data available shows 58% of American schools report having a sworn law enforcement officer on campus at least once a week. And this has happened even as vital resources for students have been starved. A recent report found 14 million students go to a school with police, but without a counsellor, nurse, psychologist, or social worker. That is 14 million kids who are in closer proximity to a pair of handcuffs than they are to a medical or mental health professional. And to hear some
The shooting in Uvalde, Texas, was at a school that had recently gotten its own personal police department, presumably in order to prevent exactly things like this. But why do we expect the police to actually do anything to save people's lives in these scenarios? I mean, one of the last big school shootings that I can think of, the police security guard hid in a closet for most of it, which is honestly a pretty relatable human experience when someone is gunning down people near you. If you look at the television over the last 40 or 50 years, all of the propaganda that we have seen has the general bent to lead us to believe that the police are willing to put their lives on the line every day, fighting criminals and saving lives. But the thing is, while that does sometimes happen, and while sometimes someone brave is wearing the badge, there is literally nothing legally that requires them to save you. Even though this isn't the impression that their heroism in all of these shows would indicate to you. It's just another one of those byproducts of TV brain where we've been so convinced that we need the police to read you your Miranda rights or you can throw the case out in court. Or, is that the police actually have any legal obligation to protect and serve, even though it's what they even write on most of their police cars. But if I'm being totally honest, the idea of requiring a job with duties this large and broad sweeping, to be legally required for them to put their life on the line to save anyone at any time, seems like a hell of a legal precedent to set that would have a whole lot of effects, and potentially effects that no one involved would want. No one involved would really want to become a police officer anymore because of the crazy risks you would legally be required to take. And if you don't believe this, here's a lawyer to tell you.
So, people angry at the tragedy are asking, can the police be held legally responsible, not for their action, but for their inaction? And I'm not going to hide the ball on this one. The answer is almost certainly no. But the reason why might surprise you, because most people believe that the police have a legal duty to help. And unfortunately, according to the Supreme Court, that is not the case. While their motto may be to protect and serve, the police have absolutely no duty whatsoever to help anyone.
But B, here's an example of the police just letting a man die because they didn't want to get their uniforms wet. This happened like yesterday. This happened within days of the Uvalde shooting and them just seemingly not wanting to go into a dangerous situation. And it's because they're not required to, and it kind of makes sense that a human being wouldn't want to. This particular drowning case also shares another similarity with the Uvalde shooting. And that is, some people say, well, the police are better than nothing. But in at least these two cases, the police actually prevented multiple bystanders from trying to help, from trying to do whatever they could to keep the people involved safe. Whether it was a woman trying to save her drowning boyfriend, or a mother trying to save her children. In either case, the police being on the scene were actually a hindrance to these efforts.
Stunning revelations from that mom. You guys probably remember. She was the one who shows up at the school.
Yes.
She wants to go in. The cops outside handcuff her, okay, handcuff a mom. She then sort of talks her way out of that. They agree to take the cuffs off. She manages to get around them, jump the fence, go into the school, get her 2 kids. And now for the first time, she is speaking to the press. Let's take a listen to what she has to say.
Arrest you because you're being very uncooperative. I said, well, you're going to have to arrest me because I'm going in there, and I'm telling you right now, I don't see none of y'all in there. Y'all are standing with snipers and y'all are far away. If y'all don't go in there, I'm going in there. He immediately put me in cuffs.
She says after Uvalde police officers told marshals to uncuff Gomez, she ran towards the school.
As soon as they uncuffed me, I jumped that first gate fence. And once I jumped it, I went to my son's class. And I knocked on the door, and I remember the teacher saying, I'm like, hey, they're already boach cutting the fence to get me. She's like, you think we have time to get out? I said, y'all have time. I'm going to run for my other son.
Once she was assured her son was okay, Gomez ran to get her other child, encountering more officers who tried to stop her.
So
I referenced a clip from John Oliver's Last Week Tonight earlier in this episode. And while most of that episode goes a completely different and also very valid and watchable route with the Uvalde shooting and its relationship to the police, I would like to point out that even he, Mr. Liberal Late Night Comedy TV news show guy, gets my point.
Went through this incident, but it's also unfortunate that my deputy had to suffer a lot of constant bashing and harassment, when he just did how he was trained.
I honestly think no one makes a better case for defunding the police than the police themselves. If throwing a kid to the ground and then having your boss complain about how everyone was rude to you afterward is emblematic of how you were trained, then the problem is clearly the training, the cops themselves, the entire system, and not for nothing, that sheriff's fake Oakley sunglasses. Or we could just try and get them out of schools altogether. Some cities like Oakland, California, have done that, and I am not saying it is simple. There is still a thoughtful, ongoing conversation there about how to handle everything from routine discipline to emergency situations, because they know getting rid of school police doesn't mean walking away from school safety. What it means is asking ourselves what really keeps kids safe. And I would argue that one good way to do that might be to take the money that it seems we're now inevitably about to flood towards school cops and instead direct it toward counsellors, nurses, and all the other resources that actually protect students.
If they're not required to. So, would actually legally enforcing an idea like that break the police as a concept? Potentially. Of course, I'm not necessarily against that either, because as you may know from a previous video, I favor the idea of disbanding the police. Now, while I admit that doesn't make a very good bumper sticker, because I want to say I want to disband the police, people think, who's going to save us from these mass shooters? But the inherent assumption there is that the police are already supposed to save you from mass shooters, and we have a lot of recent real-world evidence that that just doesn't happen. If the police aren't, as we expect, required in any way by their job to protect human life, then why would we expect them to answer the situation of mass shootings? If anything, sometimes getting the police involved in literally everything ends up with more people getting shot. Such as an incident... this was yesterday. Yesterday, a child stole, I believe, their parents' car and was joyriding, was pulled over and murdered by the police. This was an unarmed 13-year-old. I can't imagine what possible scenario a police officer would have to put down a like, how you're an adult. How do you not... I'm not sure that sending the police to all interactions between the state and the individual is necessarily the safest idea, especially for certain communities. And looking at the rest of crime for the last 30 or 40 years, crime, especially violent crimes, have gone down quite dramatically. Well, at the same time, there have been more mass shootings. But But even this doesn't have an end result of increasing the total amount of violent crime or the total amount of lives lost due to violent crime, any way you look at it. You are becoming safer and safer, and thus less likely to require your law to be saved by an institution that is not required to save your life to begin with. If we're actually looking to fund an organization that would save people's lives when they are in dire need, it seems like we would need to be, instead of funding the police, funding a medical system that is able to serve everyone in the same way that the police does. We just pay a little bit more in taxes, and that would fund everyone in our communities to actually feel, and not just to feel, but to actually be physically safer. But at the same time, when you say we should disband the police in the same chronological context as the age of mass shootings, which are more and more present in people's minds than the actuality of crime statistics and violent crime statistics, because there's much more resonant events. And because this belief that the way you deal with the violent society is to have more police to keep more people safe, by confronting that and showing that that's not even legally the case, it's not even rationally the case, and making that the case would invalidate police. Already, you see that the police are a no-win situation. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that there shouldn't be something like a Department of Public Safety to deal with violent crime that has the ability to adapt and perhaps the specific desire to stand up to a code of doing whatever it takes to save human lives. But I don't think you can expect such a general organization as the police force to be willing to make such a commitment. But if you have a smaller, much more specialized public security unit, that might actually make you safer than the police if your concern is violent crime. And it would also leave a lot more money to build up cost-effective healthcare options in the community, to build up schools in the community. I mean, imagine what the money that it could have taken to put that extra police department right there at Robb Elementary. Imagine what they could have done for the students of that whole county, distributing among all their schools. If it doesn't solve the hypothetical threat that it was put there in place to respond to, and we had, I think the person who ultimately ended up doing something was like a fucking random border patrol agent who showed up out of the blue because they heard this on the news and actually had the balls to go in there and do something about it. And I mean, I guess that makes sense because a border patrol agent is a little bit more like a military officer in training and much more properly militarized than even the police, who might actually be willing to risk his life in an active shooter situation. So why have the extra police department at all to begin with when they're not even willing to intervene in such a situation? And again, I'm not against the idea of having a specific branch of something like public security that actually has that actually makes the value to protect human lives that we're actually responding to in this scenario, like, because violent crime is such a rare scenario still, and we don't need to treat every other possible scenario like that. As I pointed out in my original video about why we should disband the police, there are a number of community responsibilities that the police have or respond to, especially due to a lack of, say, fire departments or willingness to use an ambulance or ability to even afford an ambulance, as well as the mental health crisis that could be better handled through a public mental health department, etc. Hell, in some places we even have cops running around as dog catchers. This has become a bloated organization that has absorbed the responsibilities of so many other organizations that it has become ineffective in doing any of its functions. And therefore, if anything, and therefore anything that we should expect from the police, this current system of, air quotes, police does not deliver. So I think a better tagline would be to replace the police, or bluntly, police have no legal obligation to protect and serve, which really gets at the core of the issue here. But I think that last one's a bit big for a bumper sticker. Ultimately, the point here is that if you hate the big bloated bureaucracies and government waste and inefficiency, then you should absolutely hate the police, because it can barely do any of the things that we expect it to. And somehow we have responded to this by only expecting it to be able to do more and more things as time has gone on. We need to reverse this process, to take back funding from this organization that we now think of as the police and devote it to other civil service departments and serve the community in such a way. And like all of these different organizations could operate out of the same bloated former police departments. It can be the public services building now or something. And instead of it being all police, all carrying guns and all responding to every sort of responsibility they have with a gun, which incidentally ends up with a lot of America's dogs being shot by police. Just saying, whole separate issue that could be solved by not arming this many people within society. Currently, the way the police work is roughly equivalent to trying to solve all of your problems by putting mayonnaise on them. There are a few things, like, a dry turkey sandwich, that mayonnaise might actually be the perfect solution for. But just because it makes your turkey sandwich better doesn't mean that you can solve all of society's problems through the application of mayonnaise. Especially when that mayonnaise, with its current responsibilities, tends to kill a lot of people and is highly encouraged to incarcerate more people proportionally than any other country on the planet by a pretty fucking wide margin. I mean, if you want to talk about slave labor camps in China, which absolutely, it's fucked up what they're doing to the Uyghurs, more people should talk about that. You also have to realize that we have more people incarcerated than their entire country. Proportionally, the way it stands now, the model of police in regards to crime is rarely preventative, even though that's what we seem to expect. Because fundamentally, how do you fight a crime if legally you have to respond typically to the commission of a crime? Wouldn't it be better to catch someone in the act, which means that they are doing the crime, or in the case of gun violence, after they've pulled the trigger, than it would be for you to actually prevent them from doing something, which has its own, Minority Report problems, and would really lead you to some of the strange police-type areas, like the Thought Police, or whatever the organization was in Minority Report, which are both applications of trying to solve these problems by just using technology and more cops. Maybe if we fund them to have better technology, that'll solve the problem. This is the kind of dead brain, TV brain thinking that I'm talking about here. And all of these realities, all of these dystopian premises ultimately result in you having far less freedom. Instead, the best way to prevent criminal activity is to actually make sure that people can exist in a world where their needs are met and they are able to engage easily and happily and healthy lives, no matter where they were born in the social structure and what zip code they happen to live in. Because not only would that be a more humane way to prevent crime than to penalize someone for a thought they may have had, or a thing that an algorithm may believe that they will do sometime in the future, which honestly is probably a lot closer to reality than anyone likes to think. And if we keep trying to solve all of our problems with more police, you would actually be stripping away those freedoms and ceding more of them to the state. Give us more freedoms in our lives instead, to become the beautiful, well-fertilized trees of knowledge and fulfillment that we can be. And I guess that's a shame that people are so turned off by the idea of disbanding the police, because it's one of those ideas that once you actually dig into it, makes a lot of sense. And to me, most of the people who oppose this are kind of in the right wing. A lot of people on the right wing dislike the government because of its bureaucracy and that it's horribly inefficient at doing anything. It can't keep any of its promises. It's just wasting money, creating superfluous jobs. And honestly, I can't imagine how you can have that viewpoint of the government in general. But like the police, which is absolutely all of that incorporated into a single building at the core of every town and city. But I guess what Replace the Police suggests is that while we still live in a land of scarcity, we may still have a violent crime problem because it is ultimately scarcity which drives people to these actions. And it can be a scarcity of many things. And I think one of the increasing ones is the scarcity of fulfillment because of alienation in all parts of our lives.